És hora de fer la ponència de cloenda, que serà a càrrec del senyor Sam Martin, docent i encarregat del programa d'empreses turístiques del Col·legi Warner de Recursos Naturals de la Universitat de l'Estat de Colorado dels Estats Units d'Amèrica. El senyor Sam Martin és actualment candidat a un doctorat en turisme patrimonial al Departament de Dimensions Humanes de Recursos Naturals de la Universitat Estatal de Colorado. Compta també o ha ocupat diferents càrrecs d'alt nivell en màrqueting i administració de propietats d'allotjament i complexos a gran escala i en recaptació de fons també institucionals. Donem, doncs, la benvinguda al senyor Sam Martin.
Gracias, Gemma. Thank you very much. Bona tarde. And hola from Colorado. And thank you all very much for staying this late just to hear me. But I want to thank the UNWTO and the Andorran government, and also the parishes of Andorra la Vella and the Escaldes for hosting this beautiful conference. This is my third time to the Snow and Mountain Conference, and I'm grateful that my very good friend Omar has invited me to speak to you tonight. So we have this picture up, maybe not as beautiful as the Aurora Borealis that we saw with the Finnish tents, but still a beautiful shot in Colorado from the top of Loveland ski area, looking back down the valley towards Denver. And if I hadn't had to crop it to fit it on the screen, you would be able to see the lights of Georgetown, which is a town that's about 40 or 50 miles west of Denver. Just on the verge of coming over the Continental Divide, where Summit County hosts 4 ski areas and is one of the largest ski destinations in the world. So, like Andorra, where I grew up in Colorado, is a place to ski, and a place also to recreate in the mountains during the summertime. We used this picture in an advertising campaign that we ran at the Denver International Airport. How many of you have ever been to Denver in the middle of the United States? A few. You know, it's actually the newest airport in the United States, and I think it's 25 years old now, so we need to build some new airports in the United States. But we ran this ad campaign on the television walls in the concourses, and the traffic that it generated was amazing. It was advertising our tourism programs at Colorado State University. We have a Master of Tourism Management online, and we also have 2 different graduate certificate programs. And those graduate certificate programs are now going to be incorporated, or courses from those are going to be incorporated into the new postgraduate diploma in mountain tourism in cooperation with the University of Andorra. And so I want to thank our good friends at the University of Andorra and Rector Nicolo and all of the great staff there who have been so gracious to us in hosting us over the last 2 years as we've worked very hard to bring this together and to create this partnership. So we're looking forward to it, in partnership also with the University in Lucerne and the University also in Japan. I just wanted to share with you some of our faculty that will be participating in this joint venture as well. This is our newest faculty member, Mark Gasta. And Dr. Gasta actually joined us. He was the Executive Vice President of Vail Associates. And he looks too young to have retired, but he just retired from Vail Associates and joined us as a faculty member to put together our graduate certificate in adventure tourism, which is our newest program. And he also teaches, obviously, in our ski area management program. And then Dr. Natalie Uy, who is ethnic Chinese, but she's actually Australian, and she's quite a character. She's a lot of fun. And we hired her 4 years ago to put together our ski area management program online, graduate certificate. And 2 of those courses in sustainable ski area planning and also in ski area marketing, which is actually her specialty area, are the courses that are going to be included in the postgraduate diploma in mountain tourism. So these are wonderful people, and our other faculty will be involved as well, and we're really excited about this new partnership. Just a little bit about me, and I want to tell kind of a story, a personal story about why sustainability is important to me and how I ended up teaching sustainability in a master's program at CSU. I came to academia very late. I hesitate to tell you how late, but I actually didn't finish my undergraduate degree before I went into the hotel business. And so I spent 3 years at CSU, Colorado State University, going to school, and I got bored to death going to school, as a lot of kids do. I have a freshman now at CSU that I hope doesn't go through this. And so I decided I was going to leave school, and I bought a small business that I ran for 3 years. And that business did very well, and it's actually still in operation, and the owner that I sold it to 30 years ago just sold it to the next owner. So that business is still going strong. And I went to work for the Broadmoor Hotel, which is the first hotel up there. Has anyone heard of the Broadmoor Hotel? It's a pretty famous hotel globally, but it's in Colorado Springs, which is the city that I grew up in. And I started working for the hotel in sales and became the director of national sales and moved to Washington, D.C., which was quite an experience for a 25-year-old. It was pretty exciting to be in Washington, D.C. And I worked for the Broadmoor Hotel, which was owned by a private foundation called the El Palmar Foundation, until the hotel was sold. And it was sold to Opryland, a big corporation out of Nashville. And the change in the culture of the company is really what made me make the decision to move on. And I followed the former president of the Broadmoor to the Homestead Resort, which is the second one there to the right. Both of these properties are what we call in the United States historic. They're some of the oldest hotel properties in the country, and they're just 100 years old, a little bit over 100 years old. So I have to preface my entire talk when I talk about anything that's old in the Western United States, the paint's hardly dry compared to Europe, that's for sure. So those were my mountain experiences. Both of those resorts were mountain resorts, 5-star, 5-diamond resorts, beautiful properties, 700 rooms plus, tennis courts, golf courses, and they both had ski areas, believe it or not. I learned to ski at the Broadmoor, which was 20 minutes from my house. And we always said, because of the weather at the Broadmoor during the wintertime, that if you could ski at the Broadmoor, you could ice skate anywhere. So the snow was never very good, but it was fun to learn there. And we skied at night after school. They turned the lights on for us, which was wonderful as well. So after two hotels in the mountains as director of national sales, I had the opportunity, as a friend that started the conference said, to go to the beach. And so I ended up at the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, and that was quite an experience as well. That was very different from the experiences that I'd had in the mountain resorts where I had grown up and spent most of my time. So the Del Coronado, each of these hotels in turn were owned by either private foundations or by private families, by families. The Homestead Resort was owned by the Ingalls family, and they were a Steele family out of Pittsburgh. And I left the Homestead after the hotel was sold to a big corporation. And the change in the culture in that hotel was something that drove me to move on to the Hotel del Coronado, which was owned by a private individual as well. He was actually, Larry Lawrence was the ambassador to Switzerland during the Clinton administration, and he owned the Hotel del Coronado. That was a fantastic experience. Working for those historic, wonderful hotels that had such a history to them, again, in the context of the United States, was what really made me start to think about preservation, start to think about heritage, and start to think about sustainability. So after I left the Del Coronado, I was consultant for Keystone Resort as they were trying to develop their summer product. And so they were building a new conference center at Keystone Resort at that time. And they were really the first to do that sort of thing. And it was very successful. And the conference center was beautiful. They had an unusual lodging mix there. I should say, I guess it's not that unusual, but they had all of the inventory from all of the condominiums that had been built. All of the privately owned condominiums were held in inventory for the resort, and that was the lodging that was used for the summer programs that were housed in the conference center. So it was way ahead of its time. And all of that brought me along into the idea of thinking about sustainability. Just to show you where these hotels are, DC, Colorado right in the middle of the country, right? And then San Diego way over on the west coast. And then Breckenridge, I grew up in Colorado, and Breckenridge is a place that I share a birthday with. So are any of you familiar with Breckenridge Resort? A few? So it's one of the top three in terms of size in the United States. And when I started skiing there, we share a birthday. The ski resort opened in 1961. I didn't start skiing, well, actually, maybe I did, because my mother skied with me when she was pregnant. And so I guess I was skiing in 1961 with her. But when the Breckenridge opened, as happened with most of the Colorado ski areas, the town itself was a nearly extinct mining town. So there was no lodging available at all in these towns, and barely any other kind of infrastructure. There were less than 200 people living in Breckenridge at the time. And so within 2 years after Breckenridge opened, my parents, who were avid skiers and were skiing at Aspen and A Basin, were friends with Max and Edna Durkham, who actually clear-cut the runs at A Basin, just like Joan Valademont's father, Josep, did. I don't think they built the lift at night like he did, so that the government didn't know. But it was a family project for sure. And within 2 years, my dad had bought a second home, a vacation home in Breckenridge. And it looked a lot like that cabin up there on the top right, about ready to fall over. And I couldn't find an actual picture of the cabin, though it still exists. And he was an early innovator in lodging. I'm not going to say sustainable lodging, because it's gone now. But the cabin's still there, so I guess that's sustainable, right? But he was an early innovator in that, I'm embarrassed to say, in the middle of the night when I was about 5 years old, my uncle and my dad brought a double-wide manufactured home up from Colorado Springs and put it on the lot next to our cabin. And it had subdivided into 4 small apartments with a kitchen and a bathroom and a small eating area. And that double-wide trailer sat on that lot in Breckenridge until 5 years ago, when somebody finally scraped it off of there and built a multi-million-dollar home on the piece of ground. Unfortunately, we didn't own it still when that happened. But Breckenridge is a story all in itself in terms of going from this early stages. And I think you have seen, this type of phenomenon in Europe as well. And I don't know a lot about the European ski industry, but just watching the things that were being presented at this conference, it's a similar kind of a growth pattern in taking over these villages, right? And do we do it sustainably? Do we do it well? So this is Breckenridge today. And the building down at the bottom right is One Ski Hill Place. And One Ski Hill Place was built by Vail Associates at the base of Peak 8. And Peak 8 was the first peak at Breckenridge. It was the place that I learned to ski when there was one chairlift that went from the bottom to the top, and thank goodness for a little kid, there was a place to get off halfway up because I wasn't old enough to go to the top. There was a pommel lift at the very top to take you up to the bowl, and there was a T-bar lift at the kiddie hill. So there wasn't much development there, and it was only Peak 8. Now there's Peak 9, Peak 10, Peak 7, and Peak 6 developments, all with base developments, similar to this in the 4 and 5 star range. Very upscale. The town itself is very densely built. It's so crowded. in the wintertime and even in the summertime that you can hardly drive through it. They've had to build a road around the town itself so that you could get around the town. So it's a marvel of development in a way, but some of the problems are that it has a total now of 7,187 housing units, and 1,911 of them are vacation rentals, 41%. And there are fewer lodging rooms, actually, than there are vacations, 2,911, and there are fewer, 1,984 lodging units in the city, in the town now. Well, 56% of the total lodging that's available. Well, as you've seen happen in other areas, this has caused this incredible elevation in price. And now where my dad spent a few $1,000s for this second home in 1963 or 4, the average home price now in Breckenridge is $775,000. And the average rent is almost $2,000 a month, which is almost twice as much as the national average and even the average rent in Denver. And this is coupled with Colorado's growth, which has been spurred on by, certainly what's being called amenity migration, where people all over the world, and particularly all over the country of the United States, have wanted to move to Breckenridge, to Colorado in general, because of the amenities, because it has beautiful weather, because it has ski slopes, and because it has, all kinds of places to fish and all of this outdoor recreation that's available to people. And it also has legal marijuana, which has actually been a big boon, if you can put it that way, in growth for us. And nobody knew exactly what the outcome of the legal marijuana was going to be in Colorado, except that we just have received some data this year that suggests that about 40% of all of the traffic fatalities in Colorado now are associated with marijuana. So it does have some negative effects, but it raises a tremendous amount of money for the state, which is a good thing in many ways. So the whole idea is, if you look at this development, is this sustainable? What's missing? Well, the first thing that I want to talk about a little bit is, what is sustainability? We've talked about sustainability all for the two full days, but I don't remember anybody really saying, what is sustainability? And so I want to share with you a little bit about how I came to view sustainability when I started in my graduate program. And the first course that I actually took was Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility. And the first thing that the professor told me is that we have no idea what sustainability really means. It's a very difficult term to define. And we started with the corporate social responsibility from that angle, and reading this book by Paul Hawken. I don't know if anyone has ever read this book, The Ecology of Commerce. It's a fantastic book, and Paul Hawken actually inherited a huge company from his parents that was a catalog company. So lots of you in here are too young to know what a catalog company is, but think eBay in paper, right? So think about the whole eBay site in a catalog about this thick that's mailed to pretty much everyone in the United States, right? So when Paul Hawken took over this company, he started to realize how terrible it was to kill all of those trees, to pollute the water, to put these exhaust gases into the atmosphere, to burn fossil fuels to deliver all of these catalogs, and he decided that he was going to change it. And so he completely changed the business model, and he was one of the very early adopters of the internet, and he completely moved away and eventually got out of that business entirely and replaced it with other revenue sources because it was so troubling to him. And then he developed this philosophy, really, of sustainability that's based on this ecological metaphor. And so to me, that was really appealing because I'm a natural resource guy. And so to think about ecology and conservation and the idea that business can act like and work like ecology was very appealing to me. So the whole point of ecology is it's a closed system, right? that you can't put anything into it that doesn't have an effect on something else. And that's the whole idea behind Paul Hawken's view of sustainability, is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction somewhere in the system. And so you have to take the whole system into account when you're making decisions about how you want to do things, right? And one of the things that I really took away from it was this idea of limited resources, number one, managing amongst limited resources, and also what I've highlighted at the bottom where it says actuated, not regulated activities. So what he meant by that was that mere compliance, government regulation was not enough. What you needed was commitment to really making a difference in sustainability. So then about the time I was taking this class, there was another book that came out called Cradle to Cradle. And William McDonough wrote this book, and this was based on manufacturing. And the idea is that to control the value chain, or they call it the supply chain in manufacturing, we call it the value chain in tourism, but to control the value chain so that every act that takes place that leads to the end product is done in a sustainable way. It's done in a way that's good for the environment, it's done in a way that's good for people, and it's done in a way that's economically sound and actually saves the company money if it's done correctly. And so the tenets that he brought forward, and this is sometimes called C2C, is that you want to look to the material that you're producing and manage that supply chain so that every aspect of that material is being managed in a sustainable way. You also want to look at material reutilization. So how is that material going to end up? So the common phrase that we hear is cradle to grave. And in this case, it's cradle to cradle, because he wanted to look at that material that started in the ground maybe as mined minerals. Where is that material going to end up after the life cycle of the product that's manufactured out of it? Then energy usage all along the process of manufacturing. Water usage, how much water is being used in the manufacturing process, and particularly, how is that water being returned back to the environment? Is it being cleaned and returned to the environment in an appropriate way? And then, is the process equitable to everyone concerned? So particularly in the age of globalism, where manufacturing is often done in other countries where we have less control over that value chain or that supply chain, that's a big concern. So if you want to be truly sustainable, you have to control that process from beginning to end, from cradle to cradle. And so this resulted actually in Ray Anderson, who created a company called Interface. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Interface. It's a carpet company, right? Not very exciting. But what he was worried about was something very similar to what Paul Hawken was worried about, and that's that when everybody has carpets in their house, unless you're lucky enough to have tile or hardwood, and every few years you got to rip all of that carpet out, all of the padding that's underneath it, and it all goes into the landfill. And so he created this, I came up with this idea of leasing carpet, especially in industrial settings. And then he would come in and take the carpet up and recycle all of the fibers and turn it into new carpet. So it was this idea of cradle to cradle, that there was only marginal loss through that manufacturing process. And also BMW adopted his methodology and started building their cars to be recycled, so that when the car ran out of its useful life, that all of the parts were already built to be recycled. And it also gave birth to the certified used program, where BMW actively renewed cars that were traded in. So pretty cool stuff. And then you probably are maybe more familiar with the natural step. Has anyone heard of that, the natural step? It's a Swedish concept. And it's really focused on non-extraction. Don't extract minerals out of the soil. And don't let the substances that we produce and that we use accumulate in the environment. And also, taking the social piece, try to eliminate structural barriers to fairness and equity, and to the health and the influence, the impartiality and the competence, and the meaning for people's lives. So we'll come back a little bit later to the natural step, because it's been adopted in an interesting way in Canada. So more of these frameworks, because academics love frameworks for analysis. And I think the most common one is the three-pillared framework where it's social, sustainability is social, environmental, and also economic, so that if you're not economically sustainable, then you're not sustainable. So that's an important thing from a business perspective. And then in the environmental area, the model on the right was developed. Actually, a friend of Dr. Mile and me was involved in the development of this model called the PRISM model. And the emphasis of this model is the same as the three pillars, except at the top, it talks about how institutions are involved, what role institutions play. And I think that's critical. And it's important especially to the UNWTO, because the UNWTO is a key convener when it comes to sustainability. So I know that you recognize these sustainable development goals. They're much more of a drill down than the three pillars, but they're in the three pillars if you look at all of the individual goals. And UNWTO coming up with these concepts, identifying them in a setting of cooperation, and then helping to, through capacity building, helping to implement them globally, is the only thing that's going to save our planet in the long term. So convening is really important, whether it's at the global level, or at the national level, or at the state level, or right in your own backyard. Convening is the key. So, back to this question. Is this sustainable? Well, the thing that's missing that I had brought up is that there's no place for the employees of the resort and the people that run the small businesses to live. They can't make enough money to live in Breckenridge. Vail is the same way. Telluride is the same way. Winter Park is a little different. It's not quite so bad. Steamboat is the same way. So all of these towns, Whistler in Canada is the same way, have gotten to this point where between a real estate focus, an investment focus, rather than an operational focus in terms of generating revenue, has created this glut of vacation rental homes that really wasn't a huge problem for a long time because people weren't in those vacation homes all the time, and they were happy to rent them long-term, many of them long-term at a reasonable rate to employees. But with the advent of what we were just hearing here, Airbnb and VRBO and all of the other HomeAway brands, there's now this great financial incentive for vacation homeowners to put their vacation home into the short-term rental pool, which removes it then from the long-term rental pool for employees. So this problem is a huge problem in Colorado, Western United States particularly, and I'm sure that it's a problem in Europe as well. It's what we talk about. It's what we talk about. So what do we do about it? The fact is that there's a crisis in these mountain towns. This, by the way, is an affordable housing project in Breckenridge, which is actually quite nice. It's very nice. And this is one of the things that we've run into with these rent-controlled or price-controlled homes that are being built by the government to support employees, is oftentimes the people that buy the homes as an employee then move on and they rent the homes to someone else or they put them on Airbnb. So that becomes a problem as well. But the lack of available housing for locals and affordable housing for long-term and seasonal employees is the problem. 70% of Vail workers, people who work in Vail, and a survey that was done this last year, said that they don't live in Vail. They live somewhere down valley. So Hettinger identified the phenomenon as a housing market failure because there's this imbalance between demand and supply. This down valley movement that I've been talking about, where a high percentage of vacation rentals drive people out of the market. This also amenity migration that I mentioned earlier, where people now, the affluence has gotten to the point where people can choose where they want to live, also because of technology. And a lot of people are choosing to live in mountain communities long term that can afford the prices, and again, driving those prices out of range for the people who actually need to live there to work. And we continue to see stable or growing demand. You know, skier days are kind of flat But there's tremendous growth in the summer in terms of visitation. Colorado was actually the fastest growing in terms this last year in terms of visitations, twice the rate of the rest of the country. So there's a lot of dynamics going on that are driving this issue. And also there's resort consolidation. So most of the ski areas in the United States now are controlled basically by two companies. And those companies are, one company's strategy is vertical integration, where they want to integrate the entire experience and draw as much from the visit as they can, and also control that value chain that we've talked about to make sure that the experience is what they want it to be. The other company, who's new, takes the opposite view and says that they want to, rather than creating the same experience in every resort, they want to capitalize on the uniqueness of each of the resorts that they control. So you've got this sort of battle of the monoliths going on in the U.S. ski industry right now, and it's driving a lot of new development that's adding to this problem. So who's going to solve it? And what does a sustainable development plan look like? Well, first of all, it has to be thoughtful. And you have to be committed. So someone has to be a convener. Someone has to step up and bring all of the stakeholders to the table to start talking about real solutions. And oftentimes in the resort communities in the United States, and I'm sure that it happens here as well, the resort and the town don't really see eye to eye very often. They're always in conflict. And so sometimes this can be very problematic to bring those groups together. So the affordable housing is the biggest question that we're talking about here. But in addition to that, you also want to take into account the other areas of sustainability when you're talking about convening a group and planning. So you want to have stability and responsibility, so creating that strength economically, and also trying to balance that demand and supply in terms of your housing. And then you also want to make sure that you're following those sustainable principles that also include that environmental sustainability and doing that in a way that's responsible. So all of those elements, those three pillars, are the core, and then you need a convener. So there's some case studies. The best one, really, that we found is Whistler. So Whistler Blackcomb was just bought by Vail Associates just recently. But before that, they had actually in 2006 undergone this process, this stakeholder engagement process, and had come up with this vision statement, this vision document called Whistler 2020. And Whistler 2020 was all encompassing in terms of the three pillars of sustainability and looking at all of those areas, but it was primarily focused on this immediate problem of trying to create housing for their employees. And so through this process, they created this wonderful plan, but it also gave birth to a housing authority, which was an entity that was created in the community that could draw on federal funds from the federal government and from the state government and from regional and local governments to bring that together to help build new homes. And since 2007, they've built 1,900 housing units, affordable housing units in the Whistler community, in addition to drawing the resort and the community into a commitment around the three pillars of sustainability. So all aspects of the sustainability question. In Breckenridge exists as part of this sort of amalgam that I mentioned to you, where there's 4 resorts in this one county called Summit County. And so they've started doing this convening process as well, but just recently have started this process. And you can't see this very well, and I apologize, but there's down valley communities. There's 3 down valley communities that come from all 3 of those resorts, actually 4, that give space, which is always the problem in the mountains, is affordable land to build affordable housing. And so they were able to put together a master plan that incorporated those down valley communities and then invest also in transportation to link those communities back to the resorts. So this was taking that regional view instead of just looking at the community view. And they were able to put together a housing authority as well that they just were able to pass a taxation bill or a taxation ordinance in the county that is going to create $7.8 million a year to build affordable housing, and that's matched by the federal government. And so they're going to be able to build 1,700 new units by 2020. So they're working on it, right? They're working on moving this backward and creating a more sustainable environment. So just to give you an idea, you can't see it very well, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I've given you a link in this, if you get to see this presentation, to go look at this Whistler plan. It's amazingly comprehensive in terms of all of the things that they've included in this plan, the view that they've taken of it, where they've identified their core values as a community, including the resort, and they also have adopted the natural step, which I've described to you already, and they've identified a time frame that they're going to, but by 2020, this would have been 15 years in the making, by 2020 they were going to be on the path to total sustainability as defined by the natural step. By 2060, they were going to be totally sustainable. So it's a really interesting document to read, and the commitment that stands behind it is pretty remarkable, and the fact that it's resulted in, I shouldn't say that, it has produced real results in trying to tackle this issue. So take a look at it if you have a moment, just a little bit more about that. And what they've done all the way through the document is they've identified every area of doing business in the Whistler community, every area, and they've identified how it relates to the sustainable strategies at play, and they've identified specific measures about how to track progress towards the goals that they've set. I teach strategic management, and I love this, right? If you're going to make something happen, you have to have a plan. I always tell my students that failing to plan is planning to fail. So you have to have a plan if you're going to make progress. So just another thought about this is the one thing that is not sustainable in this picture is you and me, right? We sort of have an expiration date. Mine's closer than a lot of yours. But the generations are changing. So if we're going to plan for the future, we better think about whose future we're planning for. And so we need to pay attention to the differences in the generations that are coming along. We've got a new generation that's coming along. My sons, all three of my sons are part of this. They're not the same people, I can tell you that, so you can't lump everybody into the same set of categories. But the millennials, or the Gen Y, by 2019 will overtake the baby boomers, that's me, in terms of their control over and their effect on and just their sheer numbers that populate the economy. So if we're going to be planning for the future to 2060, we better be thinking about who we're planning for. And so the millennials have a little different view of the world, maybe than we do. Maybe not. I've always considered myself kind of a millennial. I think I was like this anyway. But they feel special. Part of that's because they come from very small family units. So they've been well taken care of. They felt sheltered for the same reason. And I can tell you my 18-year-old son certainly does. He doesn't want to leave home. He doesn't want to go to college. I mean, he is going to college, but he's living at home, which is fine because I get a discount. That's a good thing. They're team-oriented. They're confident. I can tell you my oldest son is the most confident guy that I've ever run into in my life. He's amazing. They love to work in teams. And they're unusually conventional. They've watched us work ourselves to death. And they're not going to let that happen. They think that families are the most important thing. And each other, people. And they feel pressured. They watch the ways that we've screwed up the world, and they realize that the debt that we've accumulated as a society is going to be theirs to pay, and they feel pressured, and they don't like it very much. But they are achievers. They're going to overcome this, but they're going to do it in their own way. And so it's one of those things that we have to take into consideration when we're thinking about housing opportunities for the future. So does this look like someplace that you would want to stay? It's a hut in Georgia, but this is one of the preferred lodging opportunities for a millennial. They love the rusticness of it. They love the being off the grid. They love the fact that they can control it, they can afford it, it doesn't cost them hardly anything. So there's a real resurgence in hostels, youth hostels, which I know is a great European phenomenon. But in the United States, they'd kind of died out, but they're coming back, especially when it's attached to adventure tourism. This is fantastic. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, but Aspen, who's really progressive in terms of sustainability, one of the most progressive, other than maybe Whistler, or in the same group, they're building tiny houses for their employees. So the tiny house phenomenon in the United States is a big thing. I don't know if it is in Europe or not. But millennials, again, they love to build these small homes that they can spend $40,000 on. They've got a very nice place. They buy a little piece of ground, they park it on there, and they don't have to pay a mortgage, right? And so they've got freedom. And when they get tired of that place, they just hook it onto the back of a truck and drag it off someplace else. And they love it. And so Aspen has taken advantage of this culture that's evolved around this, and they've bought and built 40 of these tiny homes for their employees. So they have 3 bedrooms, I put that in quotes, because 2 of them are loft areas, and then there's actually 1 bedroom. I don't know how they decide who gets the bedroom, but one of them is actually a bedroom. And they have a kitchen, and they have a small living area. They're very comfortable and warm. And they're only $450 a month for 3 people. So that makes it very affordable. They can be put anywhere, so there's lots of land that they can be put on. The biggest problem that Aspen has had with these tiny homes is that their guests want to stay in them. And so they're going to have to build more so that their guests can stay in them. But they're pretty cool. And then this is maybe an idea you haven't heard of, although we did talk about glamping in Finland. But this is actually a 5-star resort just west of Vail, called Eagle Ridge. It's the Collective at Vail. And it's $400 a night to sleep in a tent, right? There's actually 4 more of these. There's one in Moab, and there's 2 more out and around various places. There's one near Grand Junction as well. And they're getting to be very, very popular in terms of a summer. I wouldn't stay there in the wintertime, but in terms of a summer place to stay, they're really an incredible experience, apparently, like being on safari. And then the yurts. Yurts are big. Those came from you guys from Europe. We appreciate that. And all of these are listed on an Airbnb type site called glamping.com, where you can search anywhere in the country and find these alternative lodging opportunities. Big opportunities for millennials. And then when I was searching around, I found this picture. This is Saas-Fee. And clearly, the tiny house is not a new idea, right? These tiny little places in Saas-Fee that I don't think are occupied anymore. But the tiny house has been around for a long time. So being creative, thinking regionally instead of only locally, thinking outside the box includes not just thinking about building new houses, but thinking about building houses in a more affordable area and building transportation infrastructure that links communities together like Summit County has tried to do. We have a Leitner Poma manufacturing plant in Grand Junction, Colorado, and one of our alumni and one of our advisory board members is an executive for Leitner, and he has talked to us extensively about the fact that Leitner's biggest business unit now is not ski, it's urban transportation, especially in the developing world. So it's a great opportunity to link communities, and I know that Gran Valero was looking at a Leitner Poma type lift system to move between communities in Andorra. Pretty exciting stuff. Traditional trains. The one on the top right is actually a self-driving bus. And I think we had somebody get run over by a self-driving car in the United States the other day, so maybe technology is not quite there yet. But thinking outside the box. So there is a crisis in lodging and housing in mountain resort communities. There are solutions, and they can take into account the 3 pillars: environmental justice, social justice, economic and livelihood stability, and also framed around the idea of adaptability and resilience. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 50 years. We'd like to think we do, but we don't. So whatever solutions that we build need to be adaptable, and they need to be resilient. in all of those facets that we've just discussed. In short, solutions that are sustainable. But it only happens if we work together. So to summarize, achieving sustainable resort community development, including lodging, requires the adoption of a vision and a strategy built on sustainable principles and the creation of a plan, an articulated plan for how to implement those strategies. So you need to study this current situation, develop both a social, technological, environmental, economic, and political analysis of the situation, then develop a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, and then identify the key stakeholders that are involved in the process and get them around the table to talk about this analysis and start to identify solutions. Produce a strategic planning document that doesn't just go on a shelf somewhere, but stays live and living and is also accountable back to the constituents that created it, using measures of success that you can track and monitor and report on a regular basis. That's the key to strategic management. That's the key to change, managing change effectively, and making a difference that can result in a more sustainable future. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or? I'll do my best to answer, but not in Catalan, because I think I screwed that up. No questions? Or am I just not seeing them? That's good. That means I told you everything you need to know. Well, thank you again for staying this late, and I hope I've enjoyed my stay in Andorra so much. It's my second home, so I hope to see you again in 2 years. Thank you.